Back in August of 2025, 21 Pilots released the second single off of Breach, Drum Show. And this was a song which sparked a bunch of hype because it featured for the first time ever an official studio recording of Josh Dun singing. Everyone was excited to finally get an official recording on an album of the so-called Jokels, but for many of us, we also remembered that this was not the first time Josh had given us an official performance of his vocals. In June of 2022, 21 Pilots made an appearance on MTV Unplugged, which featured a sort of remix and rebuilding of a number of their classic songs, and on many of these, including Stressed Out, Josh Dun also sang alongside Tyler. That live performance was then released on Spotify as well as distributed via CD and vinyl pressing. Now, obviously, that was a live performance and not a studio recording the way Drum Show was, so it certainly is significant what happened in 2025 with that song. And it's also worth mentioning that around this time, although certainly before the release of Drum Show, we had been seeing more and more vocal performances from Josh. Obviously, like I said, MTV Unplugged is kind of considered the debut vocal performance from him. That's not to say that he never performed any vocals before in live shows. I don't know. They've had so many shows at this point. I can't say whether or not that actually happened. I don't remember particular mentions of that, but it well could have, right? But from my understanding, the MTV Unplugged performance of Stressed Out is in many ways considered to be his debut vocal performance. And that was a performance which took place towards the end of the Skilled and Icy era, before they took a break, disappeared for a little while, and then came back with Clancy. Now, again, as far as I'm aware, there were not any vocal performances from Josh on Clancy, but for the Clancy World Tour, he did join Tyler on stage in vocal performances in those live shows, especially for the Bandito Paladin Straight mashup that they did towards the end of the set list. And that took place before Drum Show was released. Then Drum Show was released, and during the Breach Tour, I believe he performed even more, not just on that performance of Drum Show, but I think also on some other songs, sometimes on Stressed Out Live, for instance, and stuff like that. So certainly it seems like they're continuing to incorporate his vocal performances more and more into their music. And the inclusion of a studio recorded song like Drum Show, not just a live performance, seems to indicate that the next album might feature even more vocal performances from him on that. So all of this is undeniably very exciting, and I look forward to seeing more and more of these performances from him. I think he has a decent voice, and I think it complements Tyler's well and works well in the 21 Pilots discography and the type of music that they are making. And certainly the Paladin Straight Bandito mashup, that live performance, is one of the best things they have ever created. Certainly one of the best things they have ever done live. And so from all of this, as I mentioned a moment ago, it seems to place his debut vocal performance around about 2022, June of 2022, when they appeared on MTV Unplugged. But was that really the first time he'd ever delivered a vocal performance for a 21 Pilots song? Certainly if he had delivered a vocal performance in the past, it would have been as a backing vocal track, not the main lead vocals or anything like that. You could probably argue that what he does on MTV Unplugged is a backing vocal track. I don't entirely know all the terminology of what classifies as backing vocals versus primary vocals or anything like that, but it certainly seems like he's much more prominent on that than something that is strictly speaking a background vocal take. But any vocal performances which he might have delivered in the past are not necessarily the most prominent or the most obvious, so they would probably classify as that. But going through and looking at the credits of these songs, especially if you go through the album booklets and look at all the credits listed there for all of the songs, I didn't see any mention of Josh Dunn's name anywhere in there. Now, the text is small, I could have missed something, there's a lot of names, a lot of credits, especially depending on the album. I'm very happy to be corrected on that, but from a sort of official credit capacity in those album and those lyric booklets and so on, it doesn't seem like he's ever credited anywhere, until, of course, we get to Breach. But is it possible that he could have delivered an uncredited vocal performance? I think so. In fact, I think he did. I think he did for the song Bandito off of Trench. And this is only something I could have thought after we got an official live performance of him singing the chorus in Bandito, as part of that live performance of Paladin Straight plus Bandito. Now, I've always thought that Josh had a certainly distinctive voice, especially when placed alongside Tyler's. It doesn't really sound like just another version of Tyler's voice or something that Tyler necessarily would be working to imitate or anything like that. Having heard his vocal performance, you can recognize it when you hear it again. For instance, when Drum Show came out, the first time I ever listened to it, I didn't watch the music video at first, I just listened to the audio track on Spotify, and I instantly knew when his vocals were coming in because I could hear and recognize his voice from having seen him on MTV Unplugged and then in the live shows for the Clancy tour as well. So having heard his voice and known that it was his voice, it's easy to recognize his voice when it appears again. And certainly when it appears singing something that you have actually heard him sung before, like the chorus for Bandito. But I didn't sit down and try to find out if he had delivered this vocal performance on Bandito in the past. It didn't even cross my mind that that might have been the case. I very much thought this was something that they had only recently started to incorporate after the performance on MTV Unplugged. Going into the Clancy tour, they wanted to bring in his vocals a bit more. The Bandito Paladin Straight mashup seemed like a good place to do that, so that Tyler could keep singing Paladin Straight while they also brought in the Bandito vocals. And again, I've said this 100 times, it worked beautifully. But maybe part of the reason why they thought of doing that was because Josh had already sung those lyrics before. And a couple of days ago, I was listening to the CD of Trench, just full volume, blasting it, got to Bandito, going through, beautiful song. Then suddenly we get to the chorus. I think, this sounds very familiar. It sounds like there's a voice there that isn't Tyler's, singing underneath Tyler's vocals. Now, obviously, Tyler layers his vocals and harmonizes with himself all the time. So up until now, that's what I always thought he was doing. But that underlying vocal track caught my ear. Again, I didn't set out thinking, oh, maybe this is a song that Josh has appeared on in the past. But the delivery, the vocal delivery of that line, of that chorus, sound of that background vocal track, caught my ear. And it sounded exactly like Josh's delivery of the chorus in the live show, his live performance of Bandito. So then I started trying to do some research to see if there was any official acknowledgement of the fact that Josh Dun delivered background vocals for any of the songs on Trench, but of course specifically for Bandito. And all I really saw was the answer no, he didn't. And in fact, I think there was some mention, although I couldn't find the interview itself, that in an interview, Tyler had actually said Josh didn't contribute any vocals at all. Now, whether or not that's true, like I said, I couldn't actually find that interview. It was just a sort of piece of anecdotal data that I saw someone talking about. I did find on Genius Lyrics, which from my understanding is in large part sort of crowdsourced information. It isn't necessarily official credits. But according to the Genius Lyrics credits, they do show Josh as giving a background vocal performance. So certainly, I'm not the first person to have thought that this was the case. But beyond that, I didn't find any other sort of official recognition of his work giving a vocal performance on Bandito. But if he did, that would bring his debut vocal performance all the way to 2018, 4 years before 2022, and certainly many more years before 2025 or even 2024. Fortunately, I cannot declare with 100% certainty that Josh Dun officially did give a vocal performance on Bandito off of Trench, but to my ear, it certainly sounds like he did, lining it up with the vocal performance that we know he gave us for the chorus of that song in the Clancy World Tour. Now, I've included sound bites from both of these in this video. Hopefully YouTube lets me keep that up. I know there's often copyright stuff with music and so on. But regardless, I would invite you all to listen to them both back to back. The live performance and then the chorus in Bandito. And you tell me, does it sound like Josh is giving a vocal performance in the studio recording of Bandito, or does it not? That being said, this was just a quick and random video on something that caught my attention a couple of days ago. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, leave your thoughts. Let me know what you think, because I'm sold myself, but I'm willing to have my mind changed if I'm incorrect about this. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like.